Good evening, everyone. Welcome to those of you who are here for tonight's community learning session. My name is Ryan Smith. I'm the director of the City of Durham's Community Safety Department. Tonight's community learning session is co-hosted by the city and county and is organized with my three other partners in this work that I've been working closely with, and I want to thank and acknowledge them. Police Chief Patrice Andrews, Director Crystal Harris, and Director Rashana Humphrey. The four of us have been meeting and working to guide the city and county through a process, and we are in that process now to learn from one another, to think about what additional things we might do or what things that we're doing now that we could invest more in that can help reduce gun violence and save lives. That's our top priority, reducing gun violence and saving lives. There's been a lot going on in our community, and I want to welcome each of you here and recognize and acknowledge that many of you may be coming with very heavy hearts, with lots of concern for our community. I appreciate you coming here, and I hope that tonight can be a hopeful conversation of thinking about things that other communities are doing that we might do, and or things that we see in other communities that we believe we are doing here that we could invest more in. So thank you for being here for this conversation, and there will be more to follow. I'm grateful for our friends who have joined us tonight from National Network for Safe Communities, Sasha Cotton and Faith Lofton from the city of St. Paul, and look forward for an opportunity for you to learn about some of the work that they are doing and leading across the country. Next slide, please. I want to share that this talk is being recorded tonight and we'll be posting it. So if you know folks who wanted to be here but they weren't able to be here tonight, please know that we'll make that available and push it out tomorrow, and please share it with others. This is a little bit about tonight's agenda. I'm going to quick level set and talk about what this is that we're doing tonight and how it relates to the overall violence reduction planning process that is underway. Then I'll turn it over to Sasha Cotton to talk about group violence intervention, a specific thing that we want to highlight tonight, talk about what it is, how it works, and the evidence that we're seeing that it can work in reducing gun violence in other parts of the country. We'll then hear about an example of a community doing this from St. Paul, from Faith Lofton, who works with the City of St. Paul as the program manager for Project Peace. And then we'll have time to hear directly from you. So I want to note that there's a question and answer session as we're going. You can enter questions that you have. And then Crystal Harris will come back and moderate and share some of those questions with our guests to get feedback. And we're going to reserve hopefully at least 25 to 30 minutes for that at the end. This conversation will last about an hour and 15 minutes tonight. And then at the end, I'll come back and talk about what else is planned. We have a number of other both virtual and in-person learning sessions, community workshops that are coming up that we want to make sure that you're aware of. So again, thank you for being here. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about, because I know there are a lot of questions about what is the city county doing. We've heard about the violence reduction planning process. I want to talk about the things that are going on right now. Right now, we are really in this period of learning and listening, and it takes a bunch of different shapes. So we're learning and listening from folks right here in Durham. We have put out, and I'll share more information at the end. We have a series of upcoming asset mapping and listening sessions that are planned in March and that will go into April. And these are really about making sure that we understand what are the strengths that we have to build on in Durham. We know that there are people that are doing this work both in organizations and in formal and informal ways. And we want to understand what are the strengths that we have, and also what are the gaps that we see that we need to address. So there'll be a bunch of different workshops coming up. We'll talk about them at the end, but those are opportunities for us to come together and to hear directly from folks in our community who are doing this work, who's doing this, what strengths can we build on and invest more in as we think about building toward a more comprehensive plan. We're also trying locally to learn a lot more about our data. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that tonight, but it's important that as we build our strategies around reducing gun violence, that we're really clear around what are the drivers of violence, where that's occurring, so that we can be really focused in the things that we do. And in cities that skip this step, there's the risk that we invest in the wrong things and that we lose precious time when we're talking about saving lives. And so this takes time, and it's work that we're working closely with partners on to really understand in a deep way both the numbers, but also kind of qualitative research underneath it about what's driving gun violence in Durham, so that we can make sure that when we get to the things that we want to invest in and interventions, that those things are focused in the right places. We are also learning from other communities, and I want to talk briefly about that. Why are we learning from other cities? Obviously, we have a lot of strengths here. But we're learning from other cities because, quite candidly, there are other places that are showing greater success with driving down gun violence. And we're curious and we want to know why. We want to learn about what might be happening in other places that we could learn from. Maybe they're doing things that we're not, and maybe they're doing things that we are, but we could invest more in. And so we're coming at a place of curiosity, of wanting to understand, why are we seeing larger gun violence reductions in other cities across the country? What might we learn from them? And tonight is an opportunity to do some of that work. We've been learning from a bunch of different places, and we want to create an opportunity where we can invite more people into that learning so that we can reflect together about, what do we hear here that holds real promise? What do we hear here that maybe we're doing or we've done in the past that we should revisit? Maybe it's something new, but to have those conversations and shared learning together. So tonight is about shared learning of some promising practices and approaches happening in other places. We're going to hold more of these, and we'll talk more about that. And I want to say that deciding to focus on a particular strategy tonight is not to prejudge that that's the thing that we should do. That's why we want to create a shared space to learn together. There's not a single thing that we can do. There's probably multiple things that we can do in this community to drive down gun violence. This is one that is promising in some communities and something that we want to create a shared space to learn about and reflect on. But we'll also be learning about other types of strategies and approaches that show different types of promise as we go through the next several weeks and months together. And then we are engaging with different experts across the country. Tonight's also a chance to do that. National Network of Safe Communities has been doing this work a long time. They have real expertise, in particular in group violence intervention, but in other things. And so tonight's a chance to hear about groups that are supporting other cities and have built up a lot of expertise over time. And that's good for us to hear about as we think about what we can build on locally to take it to achieve the goals that we've set out. So that's a little bit about how this works. All this is going to pave the way for a summit that our mayor will be convening later, likely in June, that will bring community and civic and government leaders together after all this learning and listening to think about what are the things that we really want to commit ourselves to advancing over the next year that can save lives and reduce gun violence. That's where we're at and what we're doing. Next slide, please. All right, without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Sasha Cotton. Sasha is the executive director of the National Network for Safe Communities. Before joining the National Network for Safe Communities, Sasha led violence prevention work in Minneapolis for nearly a decade, including designing and serving as the first director of Minneapolis's Office of Violence Prevention in the Minneapolis Health Department. During her time as Minneapolis's OVP director, Sasha oversaw the design and implementation of a comprehensive community violence intervention approach, which includes group violence intervention, hospital-based violence intervention, and street outreach workers. During her tenure, she played a crucial role in the city as it faced the murder of George Floyd and the unrest that followed. Sasha, I really appreciate you taking time to be with us tonight. Thank you, and we look forward to listening and having a chance to engage in conversation with you.
Well, thank you for that warm reception and the hospitality. I am very glad to be here. I know I speak for Faith as well, from my home city of St. Paul, but glad to be before you all and looking forward to learning more and talking more with Durham. As stated before, I'm Sasha Cotton. Thanks to Ryan, the chief, and the full team for the invitation. And I'm going to jump right in. So moving on to the next slide, please. So, a little bit about the National Network for Safe Communities. We support strategies designed to strengthen communities' capacity to reduce and prevent serious violence, improve public safety, minimize arrests and incarceration, and strengthen disinvested communities. All of that to say, you will hear me talk about this over and over again. We deeply believe in the power of partnership, and we believe in the fact that communities play a critical role in helping to address the safety that they want and deserve, particularly as it pertains to gun and group violence. Next slide, please. So an overview of the group violence intervention, which is what we're here to talk about today, is that it's an operational approach to reducing violence and building trust between communities and criminal justice agencies. This is really important because sometimes you'll hear folks talk about this work and they'll talk about it in the terms of programs. And we're really careful to talk about the group violence intervention as an approach or a strategy, because ideally, if we do this right, it stands up models and relationships and infrastructure that reconfigure a little bit the way that everyone is doing business so that we can really get laser focused on those people who are driving violence and help to reduce that activity, provide the kinds of resources that are necessary, and use law enforcement resources with legitimacy and strategy. We also work to enhance legitimacy by explicitly breaking with past practices of over enforcement and under protection. We know that many communities at times feel like they have been the recipient of a lot of law enforcement attention, which is oftentimes necessary, but can also create an unnecessary burden in those communities and can sometimes make people feel less safe if the violence is not changing and the dynamics aren't going away. And so the goal here is to do all of what we can do while enhancing the legitimacy of not only law enforcement, but government as a whole. We want to continue to build up the relationship between government and the communities that it is designed to serve. We base all of our work on the central fact that communities are not inherently dangerous, that violence is driven by a very small number of people. I say that as someone who comes from a community and a zip code that people may have said historically is a bad neighborhood or an unsafe neighborhood. But I know I'm a Rondo kid. It's a historically Black neighborhood in the Twin Cities in St. Paul. And, violence does happen in some places in concentrated ways, but the overwhelming number of people who live in those places want that community to be safe. They want to go about their lives, go to work, take their kids to school, and have a productive life. But the small number of people who are driving violence make that unattainable for them. And so we want to lift up this idea that communities are not bad places, but that there are bad things sometimes happening, and we need to address that. We recognize the power of informal social control. This is where I get to crack a little bit of a joke. I am a grandmother. Last weekend, I got to celebrate my grandson's 6-month-old birthday. And when we think about informal social control, usually if I'm in a room with people, I would say, how many of you are still afraid of your grandmother or your mother? And you see a lot of folks raise their hands. Clearly, our mothers and our grandmothers have a limited amount of real recognized authority, but we want their approval, we want their respect, their opinion of what we do really matters. And whether it's a grandmother or a mother, most people have someone in their lives whose opinion matters to them. It may be a pastor, a coach, a principal, a loved one, a family member, but getting those people involved and holding them accountable is really, really important to the strategy that we utilize. We recognize that trauma and victimization of people involved in violence, we recognize that trauma and we work to keep them safe, alive, and out of prison. Um, People sometimes hear that and think that this strategy lacks accountability, and you'll hear throughout that it is very deeply focused on holding people accountable. But we also want at every intersection to look at what alternatives we have before we go straight to incarceration. Incarceration is definitely on the table when it's necessary. When prosecution is our pathway, we will use it, but we do everything we can to keep people safe, alive, and free in that order. And unfortunately, sometimes the only way to keep someone safe, alive, and safe and alive is to remove their freedom. But we do everything that we can to make that a last resort. Next slide, please. So, homicide and gun violence are enormously concentrated and often in poor Black communities. We think it's important to just name what the data really clearly shows us, that violence is not evenly distributed and it is concentrated in poor minority or Black neighborhoods, and that this has persisted for generations. It's important to name this because it also speaks to why sometimes there can be deficits in trust between those communities and government. And our strategy is designed to help rebuild some of that trust that may have been lost over generations of what feels like abandonment sometimes, or over policing, or under investment. And so we name this because it's important to be transparent about what has happened historically. It is not a responsibility that lays at any one person or institution's feet, but it is an outcome that we have seen and a problem that we need to address as we think about addressing violent crime and gun violence in particular, that disproportionately this is where and who the violence is happening with. Next slide, please. So this just illustrates what we're talking about. Black men represent just 6% of the United States population, but are represented at a rate of 50% of homicide victims. So clearly, significant representation in a very unfortunate outcome. And it's something that we at the National Network work to address every day. And we need to be explicit and targeted in saying this. Increasingly, we are seeing these numbers include in certain communities, Latino and American Indian men, but disproportionately Black men are the highest victims of homicides, particularly related to gun violence. Next slide, please. So our framework, again, strategy, not program. GVI facilitates direct, sustained engagement with a small number of group-involved individuals through a partnership of community leaders, social service providers, and law enforcement standing and acting together. This is critically important because you will hear often about strategies, programs, initiatives that focus on one or the other. There are often programs that will say we really need to get community leaders and service providers involved, and that's how we're going to help people. We're going to get them employment, we're going to get them education, and that's going to change their trajectory. And that can help. Or you hear people talk about, we need to crack down, we need to get law enforcement to the table, we need to make more arrests, we need to do more prosecution. And that too can have an impact. But what we have seen over the 2 decades or more that we've been doing this work is that bringing that partnership together makes a critical difference. And when we bring them together, we have an explicit focus on homicides and serious violence. And again, we want to reiterate that this is an approach, not a program. Next slide, please. So the GBI core elements are this partnership that directly communicates some core messages to group members. And when we say group, what we're talking about are individuals who are willing to commit acts of violence on one another's behalf. We're explicit in saying group and not gang because there are federal definitions of gangs that mean certain things to certain people. What we know is that every gang is a group, but every group is not a gang. So a group might be three cousins who cause harm in the community. It might be a group of kids who grew up together in the same neighborhood who now are getting in shootouts with a group of kids from another neighborhood. So we're careful to say group, and that's not to the exclusion of gangs, and it doesn't inherently mean something different, but I just want to sort of name that in the room for the reason why we say group. Our partnership directly communicates with group members, and it's a three-pronged message. So it's a credible community moral voice against the violence. I'm sitting in Philadelphia, and in Philadelphia, we do work here. We have for the last several years, and they have seen significant reductions in shootings and homicides here with record numbers. And their credible moral voice comes from mothers of murdered children. So the credible voice here comes from those moms who go out and deliver this message and say, please don't make your mother join a club that I never wanted to be a part of because it is awful. And it is impactful. That message is very impactful. It also includes a genuine offer of help and support for those who want it. This is not contingent on anything, right? We are saying we recognize that there might be reasons why you are involved with violence. We know that intersections of poverty and lack of resources might be affecting your choices. If you need supports, first and foremost around your safety, because we know that violence is a perpetual wheel. The person who's a shooter today will be a victim tomorrow, and vice versa. So many of these individuals involved with group violence are very concerned about their own safety. So we offer first services around their safety, and then secondarily help and support around traditional social services like education, employment, housing, training. And those services generally apply not only to the individual, but to their family and household. And then lastly, and really importantly, a credible message about the legal consequences for further involvement with violence. And this message comes from law enforcement. And this is critically important for a variety of reasons. I started my career in probation and parole. I spent a lot of time in courts with young people, both juveniles and young adults. And I never want another young person to be standing before a judge, and that's the first time that they fully understand the legal consequences of their actions, because at that point, it is too late for them to make different decisions. And this can sound very simple to those of us who understand how these systems work. It can also sound very basic, like how does someone not understand that if they're committing crimes, there are legal consequences? But people often do not understand how their proximity to behaviors can really lead them down a path that can have them in trouble in some major ways. And so the credible message about legal consequences needs to be both legitimate, right? This is not fear mongering or designed to be a scared straight message. It is designed to be truthful and transparent and to pull back the curtain about how the legal system works. When I was delivering these kinds of messages as a GBI project manager, what I often said to the young men was, your name is being discussed at tables you don't know exist. Because it is very rare that the first time someone gets arrested is the first time that their name has ever been spoken by law enforcement partners. People are not operating in secrecy, and they should know transparently that law enforcement knows who they are, they know what they're doing, and that they may not have enough information at this moment to prosecute them, but it's just a matter of time before that happens. And law enforcement is back there not offering a credible message, but offering warrants and consequences. And so before we get to that point, it's important that we deliver people information about the legal consequences, particularly not just for the individual, but for their loved ones and their families who may not fully understand all of the activity that the individual might be involved with. Next slide, please. So this is what we call our three-legged stool. It reflects the partnership that I've talked a lot about. The three-legged stool includes a leg for law enforcement, and you'll see sort of a list of the kinds of law enforcement that we're talking about. So we're not just talking about police officers, but we're looking at probation, parole, corrections, prosecutors, the juvenile justice system, which are sort of traditional law enforcement partners, but also code enforcement. When you think about the number of businesses and others who sometimes provide cover for this kind of activity, code enforcement can play a really critical role. Another one that's missing here, but that we need to add is the fire marshal, who can often help with, places that are hosting after hours joints that might be utilized by groups and gangs and other spaces that we need to put a focus on. Bringing that partnership together is incredibly important. The community moral voice is what I often refer to as parents, preachers, and teachers. These are the people that we look up to in our community that hold some moral high ground and whose opinions we value. And then the support and outreach stool leg is really about the social services and community violence interruption services that are available. You'll see the seat of the stool is the project manager, and you'll hear a little bit more from Faith, who represents this role. The project manager really holds the seat because they hold the stool together. They help to circulate information. They help hold each of the partnerships accountable to living up to their expectation. And they help to ensure that the community and the individuals who are at this really high risk of being involved with violence, either as a victim or a perpetrator, are getting the services and the accountability that they need from the legs of the stool. Next slide, please.
Give me a few minutes.
Yes, take your time. Again, so much of what we talk about is this idea of the power of partnership. I, as mentioned before in my bio, have led a variety of violence prevention strategies. And one of the reasons that the group violence intervention really appeals to me is because the dynamic around partnership is so central to what we do. Um, so these are just some of the results that GBI has been able to accomplish with some of the sites that we've worked in. As you can see, we've been able to significantly reduce homicides and shootings in a number of sites that we worked in by bringing together this partnership, doing this direct messaging, and really providing wraparound services and accountability through the partnership that we've described. Next slide, please. And this is another, short slide. We'll make these slides available to the partners in Durham to use at their discretion. But this just really illustrates another set of data around what we've been able to see as far as reductions in shootings and homicides with the utilization of this strategy. One of which I am incredibly proud of is the work that we've done in Pine Bluff, Michigan, or excuse me, Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which is a small community. You'll see it in the upper left-hand corner in orange. But they were per capita experiencing juvenile violence and homicides at a rate comparable to Chicago's. And we were able to have a 500 plus day streak without any juvenile homicides in that community, which was really the violence was mostly among young people. And so we really do see remarkable things when we're able to get the partnership stood up and working collaboratively to provide the outreach support and accountability necessary. Next slide, please. So, shooting reviews are one of the really important part of our strategy. And so I just want to do a little bit of information sharing on this Ryan mentioned how important it is to be able to identify the individuals and places where violence is taking place. One of the things I tend to say when I'm talking with folks about violence and violence prevention is that violence is as old as the human experience. There were, for those of us who have read the Bible, there were, four individuals before Cain and Abel, right? So four people on the planet, and one of them, committed the first act of real violence. And so we know that this is an age-old problem. That being said, violence is a manageable problem, and strategies like the group violence intervention, shooting reviews, and other tools give us the resources that we need to manage that problem and keep it at bay. It's not going to completely eradicate violence. We know that, these things can happen, but making it manageable, identifying those folks who are very high risk, providing them with resources and information before an act of violence happens, and then holding people accountable when they do perpetrate harm have proven to be very effective. Next slide, please. So, shooting reviews are really designed to help us stay on top of the violence. It's critical, as I said before, to pay extremely close, pragmatic, and operational attention to this consistently shifting set of dynamics. What we mean by that is in most communities, retaliatory violence is driving the back and forth shootings. So, I have a grudge with this group from the other side of town. They shoot at me, I shoot at them over a prolonged period of time, people may forget what the original beef was even about, but the back and forth dynamic of the shootings, the public display of the shootings, not only puts the individuals involved at risk, but it creates an unsafe environment for the entire community. So it's important for us to be paying attention to those dynamics and being able to predict what will come next so that we can get out in front of it. Next slide, please. Shooting reviews really operationalize this, and they're made up of frontline workers, so mostly law enforcement, meeting to discuss all of the incidents of serious violence on a regular and reoccurring basis. When we say regular, we are talking about weekly or biweekly at the least. This includes, core operational law enforcement partners. So, as I mentioned before with the stool, not just police, but prosecutors, probation and parole officers, federal task force, et cetera. This looks a little different in every jurisdiction that we're working in because it really depends on the configuration of law enforcement in that community. And the goal there is sharing of frontline insights and knowledge, not for the ability to solve cases, which is often when law enforcement meets, that's the goal, but really to think about and predict what could happen based on the shootings that have already happened. What can we anticipate? What do we know about the retaliatory violence dynamics in our community? And who do we need to go and talk to ensure that the next retaliatory shooting doesn't happen? Next slide, please. So the critical questions that we ask in shooting reviews are, why did the shooting happen? Who were the people involved? Are any of the people involved part of high-risk groups or gangs? What do we know about these groups? So who do they have conflict with? Where do they hang out? Who has leadership roles within them? Are there any known points of purchase for prevention or enforcement actions? So this is where the partnership becomes really important in thinking about what is going to make the next shooting less likely. We want to connect with credible messengers and others who have influence to try to de-escalate conflict and come up with solutions outside of a shooting that could help to calm down the beef that's leading to these kind of retaliatory acts. Next slide, please. So we facilitate the intervention by addressing the immediate situational needs of the high-risk people, their families, and networks. We do safety planning for high-risk individuals. So really, if someone feels like their life is at risk and they don't have any pending prosecutions, what do we need to do to keep that individual person safe up to the point of possibly relocating them to another member city of our network? Mobilizing influential people around high risk groups. So, again, that's those preachers, teachers, parents, right? How do we wrap our arms around people who are particularly high risk to provide them with support so they don't make a decision to go out and shoot someone or put themselves at risk of being shot? We identify impact players for sustained intensive outreach. We deploy interventions to disrupt brewing conflicts. We utilize community and law enforcement presence in micro hotspots to help, sort of tamp down the likelihood for retaliation. We use a problem-solving micro hotspot, physical environment, lighting approach, right? So this is all in. We're really trying to engage at every intersection what we can do to minimize the likelihood of the next shooting. Again, I'd mentioned before, emergency relocation is definitely one of the tools that we use. It is not something we over rely on, but sometimes it's necessary. And then addressing criminal justice systems issues. So that looks like court support, addressing fines, fees, and expungements where appropriate. Also safe surrender. So this is, sometimes people who are in possession of weapons who are not allowed to have them, surrendering their weapons, but also when someone has a pending warrant, being able to help them safely turn themselves in and face their consequences. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about how a strategy like GBI can fit into a broader based community violence intervention ecosystem, because as Ryan mentioned, there is not one solution to solving community violence, and thinking about all of the ways that we can work with other partners and other strategies that may already exist or that you all may be considering is really important to thinking about how we get to a safer Durham. Next slide, please. So a GBI ecosystem is really made up of a variety of different stakeholders and spokes in the wheel. We think about things, as you can see here, neighborhood stabilization, reentry services, wraparound services, hospital-based violence intervention, outreach, mediation, life coaching. But all of these spokes in the wheel work together to create a safer community. This ecosystem diagram is an output of our friends at NICJR, another national organization focused on violence reduction. Next slide, please. I want to talk about three key strategies that I think and we believe make up sort of the ecosystem foundation for violence prevention, and that includes prevention and outreach. This is often looked at through the lens of street outreach, hospital-based violence intervention programs, and focused deterrent strategies like the group violence intervention that we lead at the national network. Next slide, please. So hospital-based intervention provides an immediate bedside engagement to individuals who have been impacted by violence. It can be narrowly focused on people who have been just victims of shootings and the family members of people who have experienced homicides, or it can be more broadly based and focused on shootings, stabbings, and other serious assaults. It's designed to prevent retaliation by engaging with those people, providing wraparound services and strong discouragement from retaliatory activity. It links survivors to services and to credible trauma-informed support from credible messengers. Next slide, please. Prevention and street outreach is really rooted in relationship-based violence prevention. So that is trust building, credibility, and working with people who have lived experience. This is often, people who come from communities who have had their own experiences with group or gun violence, sometimes previously incarcerated individuals who really want to give back and help young people make better decisions to avoid some of the mistakes they themselves have made. Street outreach also works to prevent violence before it happens. So this is where when we're talking about cooling off beefs, de-escalating conflict, trying to arrive at some kind of a agreement that doesn't lead to violence when a conflict has been established. We want to interrupt retaliation in the hours and days following incidents, arrests, or hospitalization. We know that there are certain peaks and valleys that lead to retaliation, whether that's a shooting, an anniversary date, another act of aggression. And street outreach workers can be critically important in helping to de-escalate those things that pop up that could lead to retaliation. They also maintain daily presence and help to build relationships in community, connect high-risk individuals to supports like employment, housing, and mental health services, and act as a bridge between community members and institutions like government that may be mistrusted. Next slide, please. And then lastly, focused deterrence or the group violence intervention is really systems focused and builds that partnership between community members, social service providers, and law enforcement. It addresses the actions of groups and gangs who are most violent and responsible for driving serious violence, and gives an authentic and credible offer of support for people who are ready to make a change. The reason these strategies can be such a complement to one another is because when we think about the very high risk individuals, that 0.5% of the population that in many cities is driving the violence, they tend to be in the three places where these strategies can be done. They tend to show up in hospitals because they are disproportionately victims of violence, and so reaching them at the bedside can be critically important. They tend to be in the communities where violence is prevalent. And so having street outreach workers who are available to engage with them right in community is incredibly important. And they also tend to be involved with systems. Unfortunately, they tend to have contact with probation, parole, police, prosecutors. Even when prosecution ultimately doesn't happen or arrests don't stick, they have that engagement. And GVI or focused deterrence is a place to provide them with off ramps when they have that law enforcement engagement. We know that they're high risk, but prosecutorial action isn't quite possible. Next slide, please. And I believe that that concludes my time with you all. This has been fantastic, and I look forward to the Q&A section a little later in the presentation.
Thank you, Sasha. All right, we're now going to turn it over to Faith Lofton. Faith Lofton manages core violence prevention programs and community partnerships for the Office of Neighborhood Safety, with a focus on culturally responsive service delivery and support for residents impacted by systemic inequities. And as you heard from Sasha, serves as the program manager role in some of this work. So Faith, thank you for joining us. We look forward to hearing about this work kind of on the ground in St. Paul.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I am extremely excited to be able to share more of our initiatives with you all and talk a little bit more about the Office of Neighborhood Safety and Project Peace specifically. Again, my name is Faith Lofton. I'm the program manager for Project Peace in the City of St. Paul's Office of Neighborhood Safety. And we can go ahead and go to the next slide. The Office of Neighborhood Safety originated out of a 48-member commission, public safety commission that was tasked with re-envisioning public safety for the city of St. Paul. The number one recommendation out of that commission was to create a city staff office of neighborhood safety. Project Peace was the very first program to launch out of that initiative. Next slide, please. Project Peace is an individualized gun violence intervention that connects individuals who have been involved in or who have been victims of gun violence with intensive wraparound support services. The approach that we use focuses on a very small number of individuals at the highest risk of being victims of gun violence and those who drive community violence, a lot of what you heard directly from Sasha earlier. Next slide, please. Project Peace is designed in partnership with the St. Paul residents from neighborhoods most impacted by gun violence. Project Peace reflects specifically on what our community said that it needed, which is when violence occurs, the team responds quickly. We do not do this in a way that is to investigate, but to stabilize, to provide support, and connect those individuals and families to resources that promote healing. At the same time, our life coaches and our outreach workers build consistent, trust-based relationships with those at highest risk, helping to interrupt cycles of retaliation and trauma before it escalates. We do this by combining an immediate response with the long-term prevention. Project Peace strengthens the trust and promotes healing and creates safer, more connected communities and neighborhoods across our city. Next slide, please. A very essential component of our safety strategy is our public safety ecosystem. Project Peace operates within a coordinated citywide framework that brings together our law enforcement, our community partners, our public school system, and our county system to the same table around shared violence reduction goals. We conduct a cross-agency review of shooting incidents to understand the patterns, identify the gaps, as well as to ensure our response is very strategic and is not siloed. Again, you heard a little bit more of that framework from Sasha. What we do is we ground it in that national research that Sasha talked about and provide best practices with that. The approach allows us to make some real-time adjustments based on what the data is telling us. Just as importantly, it does strengthen the accountability by clearly defining roles across our public safety ecosystem. Next slide, please. This is a bit more of a visual of some of the key players in our public safety framework. So our community moral voice consists of family members, of individuals who have been impacted by gun violence in the city, as well as individuals who may be previously involved in the justice system, faith-based leaders, survivors of violence, also our justice partners, so our police agencies, our sheriff's office, which is with our county, as well as our prosecutor's office, our support and outreach partners. So that includes some of our community-based organizations that are providing that support and outreach component. We also have our other partners, our systemic partners, so our city council members, as well as our mayor and other departments that are essential to providing some of those core elements within our framework. Next slide, please. St. Paul confronts gun violence with a dual approach strategy. So we incorporate two of those strategies that Sasha talked about, GVI, so our group violence reduction, and then also our CVI, which is community violence intervention. This approach helps us to address violence in the very unique ways in which violence shows up in the city of St. Paul, pairing accountability with community-based prevention to address the distinct patterns of the ways that gun violence shows up in the city of St. Paul. What we have seen in our city is that we have very youth-led gun violence. And so we had to be really strategic in our approach. And so we have implemented a dual approach to our strategies called our gun violence reduction strategies. Next slide, please. As you can see from this visual, GVI and CVI share some of the same core components. GVI and CVI are both grounded in the same belief that violence is concentrated among a small number of individuals who often carry significant trauma, who have unmet needs, and who have other social determinants of health. Both approaches focuses on building real relationships, connecting people to the resources, also surrounding individuals at highest risk with consistent support, very clear expectations, and opportunities to choose a different path. Next slide, please. Our group violence intervention really kind of focuses again on those small numbers of individuals and groups who drive community violence. So we are focusing on the highest risk groups. We are providing that unified community message. We do a very genuine offer of supports and wraparound services. Some of those support services, as Sasha talked about a little bit earlier, one of the things that we're very proud of is all of our staff are trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, that way providing additional supports to those individuals and just understanding the way in which they are thinking and offering up supports and tools on thinking about things differently. That then helps to change some of those behavioral patterns that we could see. We also offer the life coaching and mentorship, a number of victim services which do include short-term and long-term relocation due to safety needs, trauma-informed supports, employment and education services, and family stabilizations. A lot of times what we see is that there are a lot of different traumas and social determinants that are present in the families. So we identify and kind of know that if we're working with a young person and we are providing them with a certain level of support and they are doing and working on their own individual healing, if we are constantly sending them back into those environments, we know that they have a high likelihood of being re-engaging and seeing some of those behaviors or being in those environments that do not produce some of those outcomes that we are working towards. Next slide, please. Another key component to the GVI ecosystem is our GVI governing board. Our governing board is an essential component of the strategy. The members of this board do include the mayor of the city of St. Paul. We now have a new mayor, and so we are re-engaging with the new administration on leading this governing board. We also have our assistant mayors who will produce and be a part of the governing board, St. Paul Police Chief, our city attorney, our county attorney, our public school system, emergency management team, as well as our Ramsey County Sheriff's Office and the Office of Neighborhood Safety. We provide additional support to informing our mayor's office and preparing for meetings and consistently giving that program or the progress updates to those individuals so that they are clear about what is happening across that ecosystem. We provide that strategic direction and that oversight across systems and coordination, where what I appreciate about our governing board is if there are genuine hiccups in our overall ecosystem, we have the ability to hash that out and have those very tough conversations in that meeting so that we can ensure that we have accountability across the board and that we are on track with our systems. Next slide, please. So how it works in practice, we are identifying the individuals who are at the highest risk in real time. Again, those small numbers of individuals who have the highest risk of involvement of being in gun violence or being affected by gun violence, communicating directly with those individuals about the risk of continuing to be involved in that. Also offering that very genuine offer of support and services so that individuals can stay alive, safe, and free. And then setting the standard, working with individuals to make sure that they understand what those standards are, and then also making sure that individuals are aware of the consequences if they continue to be a part of that gun violence. One of the great things about the national network is just really assisting cities in getting these things off the ground. The national network provided us some training opportunities to learn exactly how custom notifications work, very specifically in St. Paul, because a lot of the group violence that shows up in St. Paul was youth-based. We had to provide and kind of customize our approach to that. And so we did that training with the national network in June of 2024. Since that time, we have completed a total of 89 custom notifications to date. However, due to the current climate in the city of St. Paul and Minneapolis, we have postponed custom notifications for now, but we are looking forward to engaging and having that time to connect not only with our law enforcement, bringing us to the door, but to be able to connect with individuals in real time, showing that we care. I think that we have had significant feedback from our individuals that at first we're coming to their door. They don't know who we are, what we're doing there. Obviously, showing up with law enforcement can sometimes be intimidating, but we've had such a great feedback around, what this really did and individuals being willing to connect with us about thank you. Like, we really needed your support. We're on board. I'm wanting to engage my young person, my son, my daughter, my grandson in services. And so it was really just nice to have a face to show up to those custom notifications so that individuals understood that we have a relentless engagement approach. We're here. We'll walk you through if individuals really want to kind of promote or invest in change. Next slide, please. This is a picture of our Project Peace team. Next slide. The Project Peace team is made up of professionals with lived experience and professional experience from various areas of the St. Paul, Minneapolis community. Currently, I act as a program manager of the Office of Neighborhood Safety. Also, been coordinating over the last couple of years the group violence intervention. However, we are able to fund hiring a group violence intervention coordinator who will take over some of that connectivity approach. We also have an outreach supervisor with 4 outreach specialists, as well as a lead life coach and 4 life coaches that provide those intensive wraparound support services. One of the things that I am very, very grateful for is the fact that one of our lead life coaches is also a licensed therapist. That allows us to be able to provide individuals with that direct service, being able to connect on around mental health and provide, those assessments and really address the trauma of the individuals and the things that they might be facing at that moment without the weight of normal service connection. Next slide, please. Project Peace Outreach is rooted in community, supporting our city assets. We do this with our education to the community, building relationship in community spaces. So within our libraries, our parks and rec centers, what they do is they provide that crisis intervention and de-escalation, but it is the core of building relationships in those spaces so that we can get ahead of anything before things get started. Identifying with staff who may be in need of supports, interacting with parents in those spaces, and providing resources as well as referrals to other community-based organizations. And our life coaches provide the more intensive wraparound support services and follow-ups. Again, all of our staff have been trained in CBT to help individuals and families identify and utilize those tools to help kind of identify the unhelpful, thought patterns and promote new ways of thinking, feeling, and doing. Next slide, please. Our Neighborhood Safety Community Council is a 15-member council that acts as a bridge between city and our St. Paul community to address the structural and historical barriers relevant to navigating an alternative approach to public safety. Next slide, please. Our Neighborhood Safety Community Council administers strategic grant making to invest in community-based organizations whose work does help provide services that ONS does not currently provide. One of the things that we are always clear on in St. Paul is that we do not want to compete with community. We want to work in partnership with community, as well as to provide transparency. And so we do that through the council being made up of members supporting each of our wards in the city of St. Paul, and to be able to provide the grant making functions out of the Neighborhood Safety Community Council. Also, one thing that I want to note is that in the last 6 months, we hired a community-based organization liaison. That position specifically works with our community-based organizations to help kind of stand them up so that they are able to receive grant funding, and as well as from state, city, community funding to support their work. That also gives us a connection with them to be able to provide those additional supports to enhance the work of our life coaches and our outreach team. Next slide, please. 4 years later, we have seen a significant reduction in our non-fatal shootings in the city of St. Paul, as well as our homicides in the city of St. Paul. We have seen a 51% decrease in non-fatal shootings. St. Paul recorded about 15 fatal shootings in 2025, which was about half of what we seen in 2024, sitting around about 30 homicides. And so I want to make sure that everyone understands that this directly reflects the impact of coordinated preventative and intervention strategies. I appreciate you all taking your time to hear more about the City of St. Paul and how we implemented these approaches. And I look forward to having more Q&A later. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Faith. I think Crystal is going to join us now, Director Crystal Harris. We had a bunch of questions submitted. I'm looking at 22 right now, and Crystal's going to help share some of those. If we can't get to all of these questions, we will do our best to gather them, to share them with our partners, and to get answers back. Thanks, Crystal.
No problem. Good evening, everyone. Some of the questions I'm going to try to kind of group together so we can kind of stay on the same. Some of them have the same topics of things. But I'm going to start with you, Sasha. Here in Durham, we do have Project Safe Neighborhood, and I know that we kind of spoke when we met with you. You're familiar with that. So questions around how does GVI kind of differ from Project Safe Neighborhood?
Yeah, I think there are some shared philosophies around the idea of partnership. I think so. What I would say is I think PSN borrows from focus deterrence, and focus deterrence. GVI is one example of focus deterrence. I think what we do through the group violence intervention is a deeper set on that community involvement, that community moral voice, and on the strategic partnership. I think that that is elevated in a very different way than what PSN does. I also think that PSN really, at its core, is about a funding stream. It comes through the Department of Justice, and sites have the ability to use that money generally I won't say at their discretion, but within some parameters. What that often looks like, unfortunately, and I'm speaking generally, I don't know what exactly is being done in Durham with PSN, is that people sort of get guidebooks or manuals and are trying to implement strategies based on what they can read through a guide. They're not getting technical assistance support and training to stand up a strategy with the fidelity that we generally are able to offer in our sites. So to answer the question as simply as I can, the strategies have some shared values, but some real differences, particularly when it talks about community engagement and the social service component, and also the real rigorous technical assistance and training is really important to the fidelity of the model. Without it, things can get very compromised.
Thank you for that. One of our other next question is, how are community members that are not affiliated with the CBO engaged in this process?
So largely, there's a couple of different ways. One is our community moral voice generally establishes an advisory or work group, which is a place that, meets in some sites monthly, some sites quarterly, and is really pouring into providing insight to the partnership about whether or not the strategy is working in the ways that the community would like for it to be working. It also creates a place for volunteerism and activism around the strategy. And so the community moral voice is one way. The other way that community members often get involved is serving as the community moral voice in call-ins, so in customs. So actually going out and delivering that message to say that the community stands firmly against this violence and wants it to stop. So those are the two main ways, but every site has the ability to get really creative. And we see some sites where the community is doing community marches, community walks, engagement in a variety of different ways. It just really depends on what that community desires to do with their community engagement and how to lift it up. But those are the easiest and simplest answers that every site generally has.
All right, so our next questions are about the street outreach component. And so first question is, with GVI, are the street outreach programs, do they work in the same locations as the GVI portion? So do the CVI interventions work in the same locations as the GVI?
So GBI and CBI work slightly different. Our strategy does not rely on street outreach. We have support and outreach workers. And in my mind, the way that I would describe them is that they're much more like mobile crisis case managers. So they're working with a client list. They're meeting that person in their home or at a coffee shop or a community center or an office. So they're not out on the street doing that street level engagement that an outreach worker would do or a street outreach worker would do. So while they may be geographically in the same, neighborhoods, the way that they're showing up looks very different. One is very public forward facing, and the other is much more one-on-one engagement with individual clients. I hope that that answers the question. I'm happy to drill down more if needed.
Okay. And so for Faith, what challenges has Project Peace experienced with staffing outreach workers with lived experiences?
I think that you will always have some challenges with that. In particular, there are a lot of things that we have to work within being a city staffed office. And I think that understanding some of the professionalism that comes with being a part of the city sometimes may be difficult, as well as understanding some of the core functions of documentation and utilizing our database to document our interactions, even when we have interactions that are a little bit more in person or maybe not as planned as we would like. And so we've had a various challenge with that, but we have been stable in our staffing for a while now, and we are really excited with the different training opportunities that we've been able to provide individuals to understand exactly what those processes are, what those things look like, so that we can equip those individuals who may not have as high of a professional experience with the tools necessary to be successful.
And if I can just layer on, I think every site handles the staffing issue differently. In St. Paul, the outreach staff are directly employed by the city versus some of our sites where they're employed by a nonprofit that is contracted to the city. So the threshold on sort of professionalism and standardization is going to be different if we're working in a nonprofit. That's not to say that there's still not high standards, but there may be more flexibility to hire people with more lived experience through nonprofits and CBOs that are contracted through the city. I just wanted to name that there's a variety of ways to do that.
Thank you both. The next question is, how do we best recruit, train, and support impact players who can build trust and rapport with at-risk community members?
So, Faith, I'm happy to have you take that question, but I will also draw on not my national network hat, but my Office of Violence Prevention hat when I was a director in Minneapolis. It is critically important that whoever is working for the city has relationships and connections to the community, because understanding who is credible is going to be incredibly important. And yes, you will need to vet people with law enforcement to make sure that they don't have outstanding warrants or aren't, suspects in pending cases. But you also need to be able to vet them with the community to ensure that the community doesn't suspect that they are still criminally involved, or that the community is like, that person was like a nobody in the community as far as the street lifestyle is concerned. And so no one actually takes them seriously. So it does require having staff who are leading the work inside of the city, who have both relationships in government, but also real relationships in the community to be able to understand who the players are and to know who the community resources are that are going to help you identify the legitimate partners who have the weight to make things happen. We do offer some trainings on that, and we help cities to think through all of that, but ultimately staffing is going to play a critical role in that.
Tasha, I feel like you hit it right on the nail with that.
And so we have a couple of questions that kind of go together, as I stated. And so Durham has had some safety task force that have done some have worked together, made recommendations to the city, as well as there was a gang assessment a few years ago. And so this question is kind of twofold. For you, Faith, did you all have any type of safety task force that helped to inform your process as you were developing Project Peace? And then the secondary part of that can be for both Faith and or Sasha is wouldn't it save time just to implement kind of the needs that the community has based off of these task force recommendations, such as basic like housing, childcare, and other basic needs? How does that play in building that ecosystem or violence reduction plan?
For myself, some of that work happened prior to me joining the city of St. Paul. So I can speak to it very limitedly, but we did put together that public safety ecosystem and utilize that group to help us to identify what portions of the things that we needed to implement first. Again, that 48-member commission helped to advise us on what the community wanted to see very specifically. And then it took us to engage with other communities and other planners on a strategic plan to implement some of the practices that we wanted to see in the city of St. Paul.
Crystal, could you maybe just say a little bit more about the configuration of their task force? Because it might be hard. Like we're trying to compare what Faith did, and we don't know what the task force consisted of. Sorry.
So the safety task force, it included some community members. Some were part of community-based organizations, and they developed some recommendations for the city. It was part of the city of Durham, and they gave recommendations on how to reduce violence. It had different components to it, but there was a lengthy. They provided a great report from their work around what are some of the things that the city and or county could do to help reduce violence within our community.
Yeah, so I think from our standpoint at the national network, separate and aside from GVI, which is, just one of many strategies that an office or, a strategy, big picture strategic plan might encompass, it is critically important to look at the recommendations from any work that has been done by community leaders, community members, and really consider my belief personally and professionally is listening to your community and then looking for evidence-based strategies that help to design what they've asked for is important, right? So it's sort of this game of matching, right? I think it can be very challenging for government to just fund something based off of pure recommendation because we need to make sure that there's some evidence and research that proves that what's being recommended will likely work, right? And that's kind of where we get into this thing about data. And again, I don't know a whole lot about the process, so it's a little bit challenging, but I think the best strategies are a marrying of recommendations and desires from the community because they are the experts on what's happening in their community, married with research and evidence-based practice that bring together solutions that will address the concerns that have been expressed by the community. So I can't speak to what the task force developed because we haven't seen it, but absolutely it should inform any decision-making process.
And so this next question could be for either of you as well in your experience. But what was the relationship between the community and law enforcement in some of the cities you have worked with, Sasha, and in your city, Faith, before beginning these projects?
Faith, why don't you give St. Paul perspective and then I can talk more globally.
Yeah, I would say that there are definitely barriers to trusting relationship with law enforcement. And one of the things that we definitely seen is that with us being on the ground with law enforcement and being able to engage in a very different approach, individuals have gained some trust in law enforcement. I think that it is a continued challenge that we continue to face and will continue to face. But I know that the St. Paul Police Department has different strategies that they've engaged with community a little bit differently, but also doing that with their very unique Aspire group. They have individuals who are doing more community engagement, more relationship building with communities, showing up in schools differently in the city of St. Paul, and just being willing to hear directly from community about their engagement and being able to work directly with ONS on helping to bridge the gap with those relationships.
And I'll just say quickly, I'm coming from work in Minneapolis where George Floyd was murdered, right? We know that there have historically been very tense relationships there between the community and law enforcement. And in many of the cities that we work in, across the United States, that remains a fact. What we see, particularly with GBI, is, and what we recognize, is we're not going to change departments overnight. And we may not be able to influence departments across the board in every city that we work in. Some cities, GBI is a question on their sergeant's test. So everybody knows about GBI because it's kind of a requirement across the department. But in many places, that's not the case. What we do continuously see is that the unit that is working on GBI over time tends to build more trust with their community partners than the general department. And the example I would give is that you may have a person who says, I don't trust the police, but that officer who came to talk to me and my son, I trust them, right? I would be willing to talk to them again because they shot it to me straight. They told me my kid was out here acting the way that they were acting, and they told me what consequences could come. And then those consequences came, or my kid got it together and did something different. But I felt like there was some truth and trust building that I could stand on. And so I think it is helpful in building that trust, but it's not going to repair all of the harm that we know has existed in some places around police community dynamics. But it is a beginning place to start to do some improvement work.
And so, Faith, you kind of talked about how you all about community more voice. You have community council. So some of the questions are around: are there stipends for community members who participate, and is there any type of training that these community members receive?
Yeah, so with our Neighborhood Safety Community Council, that participation is a stipend-based participation. So every meeting that they attend, they are paid for that meeting. Any community events that they attend on the behalf of the council, they are paid for that as well. And so we have implemented that structure within our city. As far as the training, we are working on that with our outreach team, is how do we get more community informed about some of the different initiatives that we're doing, and just to have additional supports and training around different elements of gun violence reduction. And so that is something that we currently don't have up and running, but we are working on, and we identify that is
I think we may have lost Faith.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, there she's back.
You're on mute, Faith.
I'm sorry, were you unable to hear me?
Yes, we lost you in part of your response.
Oh, I apologize. I might be having an unstable connection. Can you repeat the question?
It was about compensation for community members who participate, and if there's any type of training that they receive.
Yes, so compensation, individuals that are part of the Neighborhood Safety Community Council are compensated for every meeting that they attend. They are also compensated for every community event that they attend as well. And so that's something that we have implemented as a part of that council. As far as training for our community, that is something that we've identified with our outreach team that will be a core function of theirs, is kind of understanding the unique needs of community community, what they want to know more about, how to inform them about some of the different strategies and things that we are working on out of the office, and just so that they are more educated, informed about violence and how it shows up and some of the different components of maybe like Stop the Bleed. So we are working on how to make sure that we have our community educated, our young people educated. And so that is something that we are working on as a core component of our outreach work.
Okay. And have one more final question. I know we have lots more that we were unable to get to, but we will find a way to be able to answer the questions and try to have them posted somewhere for those of you whose questions did not get answered. But the last one is it could be for either you, Sasha, or Faith, is how have you set up publicly transparent assessment systems for your programs, and basically focusing more on those with public funds? How did you set up measurable goals and measurement tools up front, and how do you publicly report on those results?
Yeah, what I would say is that because we're a trainer and a technical assistance provider, each site that we work with, we're in about 35 US cities, has different reporting mechanisms because every city's expectations are different, and sort of the policies and procedures around what they can and can't share publicly differ. What we do encourage is as much transparency as is legally possible, and to really push the boundaries on what you're able to report. So that includes public city council meetings, data dashboards, and working with local universities on evaluation. And I'll pivot to Faith to see if she wants to talk specifically about
Yeah, absolutely. So in the city of St. Paul, one of the things that we thought about very early on was that we needed to make sure that we had the ability to look at what we were doing and provide an assessment of what that looks like. And so we have utilized one of the groups here in St. Paul, Minnesota Justice Research Center, to do a complete evaluation of Project Peace. That is a 2-year evaluation, and we are in year 2. So we are really excited and hopeful when that report is published to get a really comprehensive overview of what things look like, how we implement it, and have direct feedback from the community around the engagement of Project Peace. So excited to hear more about that when that is published, but that is one of the ways that we are definitely working with community to understand and evaluate what we've done here in St. Paul.
All right. Sasha and Faith, thank you so much for the time that you've taken with us. And thank you for everyone who has turned out tonight and asked so many great, thoughtful questions. Again, we will share the recording of this and work to answer questions that we weren't able to get to. I want to flag one additional question before I hit the last slide. There was a set of questions around timing, and I think some people heard the results that you shared, Sasha, of communities that are taking similar approaches and seeing significant reductions in gun violence. And some of the questions were, over what span of years does it take to get there? Like, how long does it take to see results?
Most of our sites see results within the first year of implementation. So it usually takes 3 to 6 months for us to do data collection and to help sites stand up the strategy. And usually within the next 6 months. So if you say 6 months to stand up and data collect, the next 6 months with implementation, sites generally start to see reductions.
Thank you. All right, next slide, please. All right, so again, to everyone here tonight and everyone who'll be watching later, thank you for learning with us, for asking questions. I want to flag a couple things. This is the first of many opportunities. This is a virtual opportunity, but we have a bunch of in-person opportunities coming in March. We're going to begin a series of community mapping exercises. You can follow this QR code to sign up today to attend one of the sessions. We have 2 Friday sessions and a Saturday session with lunch provided. And these are really a chance to understand all the different people who are engaged in this work in formal and informal ways across Durham, to understand the gaps and the strengths that you see in Durham. So this is very much a participatory workshop. You can attend any one of those 3, and we'll have other opportunities like that coming. And then we're going to have more learning sessions like this. We have one planned already on March 24th with the city of Greensboro, and we're working with other cities that are doing, interesting work, Newark, Baltimore, Detroit, that we want to continue to learn from and create opportunities like we had tonight with Faith and Sasha. If you want to track these things on it, we have our website here where we'll be posting, and we'll of course be communicating out through the city's communication department and county as we're adding new dates. And then finally, I would love if you would take time to scan the QR code for feedback today. There's a number of questions about what did you find interesting? What concerns or questions do you have about these approaches that we would really love to hear from you? So if you have time to do that, we'll leave this slide up. Please check these things out. And we look forward to more conversations and learning together in the coming weeks and months ahead. Again, Sasha and Faith, thank you so much for the work you're doing, for taking time to be here with us to share about the work in Durham. We're grateful for you, and thank you. All right, everyone. That wraps up tonight's learning session. We'll stick around. I'll leave the slide up for a couple of minutes in case you want to write things down or scan items. But thank you and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Sheila, are you able to capture and download the questions that we asked that we weren't able to get to?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
We'll be able to.
I'll stay on until if you could see if you could do that, that'd be great.
Mhm.
I'll play around with it too. Thank you. Sheila, I copied and pasted them. There might be a better way to do it, but I do have them copy and pasted in an email that I'll share out with the group so we can work on responses.
Perfect. Yeah, I think at least we can, through the recording, we'll be able to access them as well. But if you have that backup option, that's great.
We will close the session out at 7 o'clock. And then again, this recording will be posted and available if you want to come back and anything that you missed. But we'll close it in 5 minutes. I still see some folks here, so just giving a few minutes in case folks are writing down or working on filling out the survey and want to come back to some links. So we'll end it at 7 o'clock. Thank you again for being here.